Deep within the subterranean underbelly of the Hunter Guild, the air hung thick with the metallic stench of endless bloodshed. Heavy iron chains clanked softly as Shinn hung suspended from the cold ceiling, his body broken and heavily lacerated. Across the narrow chamber, Manori watched him through tangled strands of silver hair, her own limbs bound tightly by glowing magical runes. For 3 agonizing years, the elite hunters treated the immortal siblings as nothing more than renewable livestock for grinding experience points. Every fatal strike delivered by their captors would trigger their passive immortality, healing their bodies only to reset the cycle of torture. But on this silent night, the structural integrity of the main containment wards suddenly flickered due to a massive surface raid. Feeling the magical pressure drop, Shinn gritted his teeth and pulled against his iron bindings with raw, desperate strength. With a horrific tearing sound, he shattered his own wrist bones to slip free from the unyielding metal cuffs. He dropped heavily to the stone floor, his hands already reforming into shape as he rushed over to his sister. Using his bare, regenerating fingers, he tore through the weakened magical arrays, binding her frail body. Free from their cages but lacking any combat strength, the siblings crept out into the dark corridors of the abandoned lower levels. Shinn realized that their current low levels would make escape impossible if the S-rank hunters returned to check the pens. He turned to Manori, suggesting a radical, terrifying method to forcibly increase their stats through their own system loop. If they killed each other repeatedly, the system would award experience points before their immortality forced a complete resurrection. Without hesitating, Manori picked up a discarded iron spike from the floor and plunged it deep into her brother's chest. Blood splattered across the stone walls as Shinn collapsed, his vision fading into darkness for a brief second. A golden system notification flashed in the dark, confirming the experience gained just as his wounds began to violently knit back together. Rising immediately, Shinn took the spike and drove it through Minori's heart to balance their growing power levels. For hours, the underground chamber turned into a surreal theater of mutual slaughter and instantaneous resurrection. The agonizing pain of 100 deaths tore at their minds, but their hatred for the guild kept them sane. With every cycle of death, their physical stats multiplied exponentially, shattering the natural limits of the system. Shinn's muscles grew denser, and a terrifying crimson energy began to crackle naturally across his bare skin. Minori's magical capacity swelled to monstrous proportions, manifesting as a swirling vortex of black, infernal flames around her boots. Suddenly, heavy footsteps echoed down the main corridor as Abe Teru returned to check on his prized livestock. The elite hunter stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the shattered prison doors and the massive pools of blood. From the deep shadows of the room, Shinn stepped forward, his crimson eyes burning with absolute malice. Abe Teru recovered his composure and laughed aloud, drawing his blade to put the escaped livestock back in their place. With a blinding burst of speed, Shinn closed the distance before the hunter could even swing his sword. Shinn gripped the golden blade with his bare hand, shattering the high-tier steel into useless fragments. Abe, Teru's eyes filled with pure terror as he realized the pathetic livestock had somehow surpassed his own power. Before he could call for help, Manori unleashed a wave of black fire that incinerated his golden armor instantly. The hunter screamed in agony as the infernal heat melted his gear and seared through his flesh. Shinn grabbed the hunter by his throat, lifting his heavy frame effortlessly off the ground. He whispered cold promises of retribution into the hunter's ear, replicating the exact words Teru had used during their torture. Methodically, Shinn broke every major joint in the hunter's body, ensuring he experienced the true meaning of absolute despair. The once proud S-rank hunter wept and begged for mercy, reduced to a broken heap on the ruined stone floor. With a final crushing blow, Shinn brought his fist down, ending the life of their first tormentor permanently. As the dust settled, the siblings stood over the remains, their hearts completely hollowed out by the act of vengeance. They turned away from the gruesome scene and sprinted toward the hidden exit leading out into the surrounding wilderness. Reaching the surface, they plunged into the dense fog of the outer forests, knowing the entire guild would soon be hunting them down. Far behind them in the depths of the mansion, a massive emergency alarm began to blare as automated systems detected Teru's death. In the center of the command room, a massive magical projection map illuminated their last known coordinates, locking onto their signatures. A towering silhouette stepped into the light of the monitors, his massive frame radiating an immense, crushing pressure. Kongu, the brutal S-rank hunter renowned for his merciless tracking abilities, crushed his stone chalice in raw anger. He growled a low vow to dismantle the runaway livestock piece by piece, ordering his vanguard units to deploy immediately. Deep inside the foggy woods, Manori suddenly stopped and gripped her chest as a cold, malevolent tracking curse activated on her skin. Shinn knelt beside her, his crimson eyes widening as he heard the distant thunderous sound of heavy warhounds approaching through the mist. The low growls of the approaching warhounds vibrated through the damp earth, forcing Shinn to quickly hoist his sister onto his shoulders. He bolted forward into the dense wilderness, his feet sinking slightly into the soft, decaying moss with every frantic step. Ahead lay the gaping, jagged entrance of the Toxic Mire, a notorious S-rank dungeon known for its lethal atmosphere. Without hesitation, they plunged directly into the shimmering violet fog that hung heavily over the subterranean wetlands. The toxic vapors immediately entered their lungs, searing their airways and causing black veins to spread rapidly across their necks. Thanks to their endless immortality, their internal organs ruptured and regenerated simultaneously in an agonizingly continuous loop. After several minutes of intense suffering, their bodies fully adapted to the environment, completely neutralizing the lethal effects of the swamp. Shinn selected a secluded, hollowed-out root system beneath a massive weeping willow to serve as their makeshift headquarters. For 3 consecutive days, they meticulously gathered the most concentrated venomous fluids from the bubbling geysers nearby. He began digging deep trenches around the perimeter, lining the bottoms with jagged stakes coated in the lethal concentrate. Meanwhile, Manori wove complex concealment barriers made of dense, illusory magic to mask their physical signatures from high-level tracking spells. On the 4th morning, a sudden, thunderous shockwave shattered the quietude of the cavern as a massive figure breached the entrance. It was Kongu, the S-rank vanguard of the Hunter Guild, his heavy steel-plated armor clanking loudly with every step he took. He bellowed a deafening challenge that caused loose stalactites to break away from the ceiling and crash into the murky waters. Shinn watched silently from the high branches of the willow, his crimson eyes tracking the giant's reckless advance. Kongu took another massive step forward, completely unaware that his heavy boot was descending directly onto a concealed pressure plate. The ground suddenly gave way, snapping open a hidden trench that sent Kongu plunging knee-deep into a bed of poisoned stakes. The toxic barbs pierced through the joints of his greaves, injecting the highly concentrated acid directly into his flesh. Roaring in pain, Kongu swung his massive club in a wild arc, instantly obliterating the surrounding trees with absolute brute force. Seizing the moment of distraction, Shinn dropped from the canopy like a hunting hawk, his blade coated in a dark, shimmering aura. The blade sliced cleanly through the exposed leather straps of Kongu's shoulder armor, carving a deep gash across his massive back. Kongu barely flinched, spinning around instantly to backhand Shinn with enough force to shatter a solid stone wall. Shinn was launched backward through the air, his ribs fracturing loudly before he crashed heavily against a rocky outcrop. Even as his bones shattered, a brilliant crimson glow erupted from his chest, knitting his flesh back together in a fraction of a second. He stood back up with a cold, unsettling smile, wiping the blood from his chin as if the devastating blow had been nothing more than a breeze. Kongu's eyes widened in sheer disbelief as he witnessed the instantaneous, flawless recovery of a mortal wound. Before the giant could recover his bearings, Manori unleashed a swarm of glowing purple magic projectiles from the tree line. The spells erupted against Kongu's heavy chest plate, creating a series of blinding explosions that forced him back a step. Shinn used the blinding smoke cover to close the distance, sliding beneath the giant's wide stance with terrifying speed. He reached upward, placing his palm directly against the unarmored back of Kongu's left knee joint. With a quiet murmur, Shinn activated his localized body part manipulation spell, targeting the cellular matrix of the giant's tendons. The muscle tissue within Kongu's leg began to unravel violently, turning into a liquid slurry that dissolved from the inside out. Kongu let out a horrifying shriek as his massive left leg collapsed entirely, sending his immense body crashing into the mud. Shinn stepped back onto the firm ground, looking down at the writhing vanguard with absolute coldness in his eyes. Defiant to the end, the S-rank hunter raised his heavy war club with one hand, trying desperately to swing at his tormentor. Shinn brought his boot down with bone-crushing force, pinning Kongu's wrist flat against the wet earth and disarming him completely. He extended both hands, letting the dark manipulation spell crawl across the rest of the giant's massive limbs. Piece by piece, Kongu's physical form was systematically dismantled, his S-rank durability entirely useless against the absolute cellular regression. Within minutes, nothing remained of the fearsome vanguard, but a neatly severed, silent head resting inside a pristine steel transport box. Shinn carefully closed the heavy metal lid, engraving the insignia of the Hunter Guild directly onto the top with a burning finger. Manori stepped out from the shadows, holding a teleportation scroll that would deliver this grim message directly to the guild master's desk. With a brief incantation, the box vanished into a flash of light, leaving the siblings alone once more in the quiet, toxic depths. Shinn turned his gaze toward the western exit of the cavern, his sensory abilities picking up a strange, rhythmic resonance from far away. Deep within the urban infrastructure beyond the swamp, thousands of faint, hollow heartbeats echoed in perfect, terrifying unison. Shinn's eyes widened as he realized these synchronized heartbeats carried the exact same spiritual frequency as his own sister, Manori. The echoes of those synchronized heartbeats resonated through the damp cavern walls, filling Shinn with a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread. He turned toward Manori, whose own expression had hardened into an icy mask of recognition. The trail of magical energy led them directly up into the sub-basement of a sprawling, opulent urban mansion. Pushing open the heavy reinforced doors, they discovered a vast, sterile laboratory filled with rows of glass stasis pods. Inside each cylindrical container floated an exact, emotionless clone of Manori, suspended in a state of perpetual artificial sleep. Thousands of stolen lives had been manufactured here, built solely to serve as infinite experience point livestock for the elite hunters. A sharp, metallic click echoed through the chamber as Ishiki Seiya stepped out from the shadows, casually resting his hand on his sword hilt. The sadistic swordsman taunted the siblings, boasting about how many times he had personally slaughtered these flawless duplicates for sport. Without a word, Manori unleashed a torrent of black infernal flames that raced across the floor toward the mocking swordsman. Ishiki drew his glowing blue katana with blinding speed, cleanly deflecting the dark magic with a single fluid swipe. Shinn capitalized on the distraction, charging forward with dark red lightning crackling around his shattered porcelain mask. Their weapons clashed with a deafening ring, sending a powerful shockwave through the glass structures around them. Ishiki's blade was incredibly precise, carving deep lacerations across Shinn's chest in a matter of milliseconds. Shinn simply grinned through the pain, ignoring the deep wounds as his flesh instantly knitted back together. The swordsman's confident smile finally faltered as he realized his lethal strikes had absolutely no permanent effect. Seizing the moment of hesitation, Manori shattered the control console, releasing the army of clones from their glass prisons. The glass cylinders shattered simultaneously, sending a massive deluge of glowing fluid cascading across the metallic floor. Awakened from their slumber, the duplicates opened their eyes, instantly sharing a collective consciousness with Manori. Hundreds of identical clones raised their hands together, channeling a massive, unified network of black infernal fire. Ishiki screamed in sheer terror as the overwhelming vortex of dark flames completely consumed his body, erasing him from existence. Suddenly, the ceiling above them fractured violently as a massive beam of golden holy light tore through the mansion. Guild Master Kira Haruto descended slowly through the smoking crater, surrounded by an oppressive, godlike magical pressure. He looked down at the siblings with utter disdain, declaring that broken livestock had no right to challenge the heavens. With a flick of his wrist, Kira unleashed a catastrophic magical ambush, manifesting hundreds of glowing golden holy spears. The spears rained down with catastrophic force, obliterating the laboratory structures and vaporizing dozens of clones instantly. Shinn threw himself in front of Manori, his body repeatedly skewered by the devastating holy weapons. Even with their legendary regeneration, the holy energy began to burn their flesh at a conceptual level, slowing their healing factor. Kira laughed mockingly at their struggles, preparing a massive final spell to completely erase their souls. Realizing they had reached their absolute limit, Shinn looked back at Manori and tightly grasped her trembling hand. Instead of fighting the damage, they chose to push their regenerative abilities past the absolute breaking point of mortality. The collective souls of all remaining duplicates merged into them, triggering a godlike species evolution. A blinding pillar of primordial cosmic energy erupted from the siblings, completely shattering Kira's golden solar spell. Kira's eyes widened in sheer disbelief as his ultimate absolute magic was casually dissolved into nothingness. From the smoke emerged the siblings, fully evolved into transcendent beings of absolute immortality, sporting ethereal cosmic wings. Shinn casually raised a single finger, completely locking the space around Kira so he could not escape. Manori conjured a single localized spark of their newly evolved primordial fire directly inside the guildmaster's core. Kira Haruto screamed as the primordial flames consumed him from the inside out, completely erasing his physical body, his magic, and his very soul from reality. The oppressive atmosphere vanished instantly, leaving behind a profound, peaceful silence across the ruined landscape. Shinn and Manori descended back to the ground, looking out over the free world they had fought so hard to reclaim. Hand in hand, the siblings smiled genuinely for the first time in centuries, finally free from the shadows of retribution as a beautiful new dawn broke over the horizon.